Welcome back to PsychVids. Today we are focusing on locus of control. I'm your host for this explainer, and we're going to dive deep into a psychological concept that basically acts as the architect of your personal agency. This is an invisible mental framework, and it absolutely shapes how you interpret failure, how you celebrate success, and really, how you navigate your entire world. So let's kick things off by picturing two people who just faced the exact same setback. Imagine they both walk out to their cars on a Monday morning, they're already running 10 minutes late, only to find a completely flat tire. Now think about the emotional weight of this moment. One person gets a surge of adrenaline, but it immediately channels into empowerment, right? They start problem solving, grabbing the jack, figuring out the spare, recalculating their commute. The other person? They get this heavy, sinking feeling in their chest. They feel totally victimized, slump against the car, and just ask why the universe is always out to get them. The event is identical. The shattered rubber, the lost time, all the same. But the psychological reality they're experiencing is entirely different. Here is a quick look at exactly how we're going to break this down. First, what locus of control is. Then the internal versus external spectrum, how it impacts your life, the danger of the extremes, and finally, how to shift your mindset. Let's jump into Section 1. What is locus of control? The origin of agency. This term was actually coined by psychologist Julian Rotter back in 1954 as a core part of social learning theory. And it's entirely about where you believe the power in your life actually lives. It's defined as the degree to which people believe they have control over the outcomes of events in their lives. Now, to understand why this was such a massive breakthrough, you've got to remember that in the 1950s, a lot of experts kind of just assumed human behavior was a simple reaction to rewards and punishments. Rotter realized there was a huge missing piece, which is our internal beliefs. We aren't just talking about being a cheerful optimist or a grumpy pessimist. This is an unconscious, deep-seated belief system about who or what is pulling the strings in your reality. It's literally an invisible lens you don't even realize you're wearing. Moving right along to Section 2, the internal versus external spectrum, drivers and passengers. The thing you have to understand is that this concept isn't just a simple binary switch. It's a wide spectrum. On one side, you have the internal locus. This is where your core operating belief is, I am the captain of my ship. You deeply believe that your daily choices, your physical effort, and your hard work dictate your successes and your failures. On the flip side is the external locus, where the mindset is a lot more like, I am a leaf in the wind. If you lean heavily this way, your day-to-day feeling is often one of being directionless. You feel like a passenger, where your whole life trajectory is at the mercy of outside forces, whether that's luck, fate, the economy, or just the shifting moods of people around you. Let's apply this to a real-world scenario, like getting a rejection letter after a huge job interview. The contrast in the internal monologue here is staggering. The internal thinker zeroes right in on controllable factors. They'll look at their resume, critique their interview performance, and think, okay, I need to sharpen my skills before I apply to the next place. The external thinker faces that exact same rejection email, but immediately blames a biased environment. They might say, well, the job market is totally rigged anyway. They probably had an internal candidate. There's no point in even trying. We see that exact same contrast back at our flat tire example from earlier. One mindset focuses on a proactive solution. I can change this tire, get a little dirty, and just adjust my afternoon schedule. The other mindset spirals into feeling uniquely targeted by cruel fate. The universe hates me and my entire week is completely ruined. Think about your very last minor inconvenience. Maybe you spilled your coffee or got stuck in unexpected traffic. Which mindset did you naturally default to? Now, here's a super interesting nuance. You aren't permanently stuck as a captain or a leaf. Most of us actually slide back and forth along this spectrum, depending on the specific domain or chapter of our lives. You might have a fiercely internal locus at work, taking full charge of your career, managing your team aggressively, owning your mistakes, but you might simultaneously have a highly external locus in your romantic relationships, feeling totally at the mercy of your partner's moods. Section 3. How it impacts your life. The ripple effect. Quick caveat here, we always have to remember that in psychology we're talking about correlations, not exact causations. But research strongly associates an internal locus of control with some massive life advantages. We're talking better stress management, higher overall achievement, incredible motivation, and proactive habits like consistent exercise and a better diet. And if we look at the mechanics of human motivation, it makes perfect sense. Motivation is heavily tied to expectation. If you genuinely believe that putting in effort will give you a tangible reward, your brain floods your system with dopamine to get you to do the work. If you believe your actions actually matter, you're obviously going to study harder, negotiate better, and bounce back faster. Conversely, if you constantly believe you're at the mercy of fate, that is heavily linked to higher anxiety, chronic passivity, and a general lack of effort. Over time, this drops your long-term achievement and leads to a really dangerous phenomenon called learned helplessness. This is what happens when someone is repeatedly exposed to stressful situations that they truly can't control. Eventually, they just stop trying to escape or improve things, even when they're later put in a scenario where they do have control. The brain basically learns that effort is pointless, so it shuts down the motivation centers to save energy. The person just accepts the suffering because they falsely believe nothing they do will ever make a difference.
Which brings us to Section 4, the danger of the extremes, the double-edged sword.
We really need to push back on a pop psychology myth here. People act like being entirely internal is always a perfectly healthy thing. Actually, scratch that. It's a double-edged sword. An extreme internal locus can lead to toxic self-blame. If you believe you control absolutely everything, you're inevitably going to blame yourself for things genuinely outside your control, like a sudden economic downturn or getting a random physical illness. That creates a hyper-pressure environment that breeds severe burnout. On the other hand, an extreme external locus actually serves a psychological purpose. It protects you during genuine catastrophes. If a hurricane destroys your home, an external locus rightfully removes the self-blame so you don't shoulder the guilt of a natural disaster. But living in that protective bubble permanently, that breeds resentment and a chronic victim mentality. So the big takeaway here is realizing that living exclusively at the far left or the far right of this spectrum is incredibly damaging to your mental health. The goal isn't to think you're some all-powerful God who controls the universe, and it's also not to think you're a helpless victim who controls absolutely nothing.
Let's look at Section 5, how to shift your mindset, finding the healthy middle.
The great news is that your locus of control isn't just a static personality trait. It's a cognitive skill. You can actively build it. There's strong psychological evidence that you can deliberately shift your locus through everyday techniques. We're going to talk about categorizing challenges, reframing language, and tracking wins. Let's look at how you can implement these right now. Step 1 is the serenity prayer approach, where you literally categorize your daily challenges. Take a modern issue, like doom scrolling the news or dealing with a highly toxic boss. When you face this, mentally divide the problem into 2 distinct buckets. Bucket 1 is what you can influence, your personal effort, your emotional reactions, and setting firm boundaries. Bucket 2 is what you absolutely cannot influence, like the weather, the global economy, or your boss's terrible personality. Stop wasting your precious mental bandwidth fighting the unchangeables in Bucket 2. Pour all your focus into dominating your circle of control in Bucket 1. Step 2 is catching your language and consciously shifting it from external complaints to internal ownership. Listen closely to how you speak. Pivot from feeling forced, saying things like, "Oh, I have to do this," to recognizing your agency by saying, "I choose to do this." Instead of claiming, "They make me mad," take ownership of your emotional remote control. Say, "I am letting this frustrate me." Let that sink in for a second. It's a subtle linguistic shift, but it's incredibly powerful because it reminds your brain who is actually in charge of your internal state. Step 3 is to build momentum by setting small, controllable goals and tracking your wins. Your brain is essentially a prediction machine, right? It relies heavily on past data. You have to prove to your brain that your actions actually drive outcomes to encourage neuroplasticity and break those passive habits. When you achieve something, even just finishing a book or organizing your desk, write down the specific effort you put in that caused that success. Building evidence of your control physically rewires your mindset over time. You are literally creating new neural pathways that default to empowerment rather than helplessness. And the beauty of all this is that it acts as a massive, self-fulfilling prophecy. As this quote perfectly captures, the moment you start believing you have more control, you actually gain more control. Once you step out of the passenger seat and grab the steering wheel, your behaviors naturally align with success. The universe might deal the cards, for sure, but you always get to choose exactly how you play the hand. So if you audited your own thoughts today, would you find a captain or would you find a passenger? Subscribe so you don't miss an episode.